A calm man rarely raises his voice, yet rooms adjust when he enters. Some mistake that stillness for indifference. Others feel something sharper and cannot explain why. Emotional men often react to what they cannot read, and calmness offers no surface to grasp. The tension you notice around restraint is not accidental. It is recognition. What appears quiet may be the most disruptive presence of all. Lesson 1. Calm men terrify emotional men because calm is threatening in ways noise can never be. An emotional man measures strength through visible reaction, volume, urgency, explanation, defense. He trusts movement because movement reassures him that something is happening. When he meets a man who does not rush to respond, the familiar signals disappear. There is no argument to climb into, no visible wound to press, no emotional doorway left open. Silence removes his map. Most conflicts are not fights over truth. They are negotiations for emotional control. Watch a disagreement closely. One voice rises, searching for confirmation through intensity. The other remains steady, almost distant. The louder man believes pressure will force engagement. History has already tested this pattern. Pressure works only when the other person agrees to play the same game. 7. 8. Calm refuses the invitation. A calm man does not rush to defend himself because he is not negotiating his worth in real time. Emotional men often mistake this for arrogance. They expect justification because they constantly justify themselves. When none arrives, discomfort begins to grow. Was the insult ineffective? Was the accusation ignored? Or worse, was it understood and simply judged unworthy of response? Silence is not absence. It is selection. In workplaces, this tension appears quietly. Meetings fill with explanations, interruptions, and small performances disguised as collaboration. One man speaks less. He listens longer than others tolerate. When he finally answers, his words land without excess emotion. The emotional men feel exposed without knowing why. They shared everything and gained nothing. He revealed little and somehow gained authority. Emotional men depend on emotional mirrors. They seek confirmation through shared agitation. If they become frustrated, they expect frustration back. If they become offended, they expect defense or apology. Calmness denies both. It does not soothe them, and it does not fight them. It simply remains unchanged. To someone governed by reaction, this feels like resistance. Consider conflict outside work. A heated argument between friends or partners often escalates because both sides accelerate together. Tone sharpens, posture tightens, words outrun intention. Insert one calm presence into that moment. Someone who lowers their voice instead of raising it. Someone who pauses instead of interrupting. The emotional man experiences this as imbalance. His intensity suddenly looks excessive under steady light. Calm is threatening because it exposes proportion. Many emotional men fear being unreadable themselves. They rely on constant expression to avoid misunderstanding. When they encounter restraint, they imagine hidden motives. Surely, anger is being suppressed. Surely, judgment is waiting underneath. They project storms because storms are familiar territory. Yet calmness is rarely suppression. It is decision. The calm man has already argued with himself before speaking to others. He has rehearsed restraint long before the moment demanded it. Emotional men sense this preparation without recognizing it. They feel outmatched, not by aggression, but by the absence of need. And nothing unsettles reactive behavior more than a man who does not need the reaction at all. Lesson 2. Calm men terrify emotional men because calm is threatening to those who survive through reflection rather than direction. Emotional men search constantly for mirrors. They study faces, tones, gestures, waiting for confirmation that their feelings have landed. Agreement comforts them. Opposition energizes them. Both provide engagement. What unsettles them is the man who offers neither. Reaction depends on feedback. Without it, momentum collapses. In conversation, emotional men often escalate unconsciously. They repeat a point louder. They add sharper language. They lean forward, interrupt, insist. Not always out of aggression, but out of fear that they are disappearing from the exchange. When the calm man listens, without rushing to validate or oppose, the emotional man feels suspended. Words fall into space without echo. Why does this disturb him? Because emotion seeks participation. A calm man does not rush to fill silence simply to relieve tension. He allows pauses to exist. To him, silence is information. It reveals impatience, insecurity, intention. Emotional men experience silence differently. To them, silence feels like rejection. If nothing is said, something must be wrong. If no reaction appears, judgment must be forming. Time has proven this pattern. People often confess more in front of someone who refuses to interrupt. The calm listener becomes a surface onto which others project themselves. Emotional men begin explaining more than necessary. They clarify points no one questioned. They defend motives that were never attacked. They attempt to pull emotion from stillness like water from stone. And when nothing emerges, unease grows. Imagine a negotiation. One person argues passionately for urgency, stacking reasons rapidly, fearing hesitation will weaken the case. Across the table sits someone composed, asking fewer questions than expected. No visible excitement, no visible resistance. Minutes stretch longer than comfort allows. Eventually, the emotional negotiator fills the space again, offering concessions simply to provoke movement. Calm did not dominate through force. It allowed impatience to reveal itself. There is another layer beneath this discomfort. Emotional men often regulate themselves through external reactions. Approval steadies them. Conflict sharpens them. Even disagreement gives structure. Remove those signals, and they confront themselves alone. The calm man becomes threatening because he refuses emotional labor on behalf of others. He does not reassure unnecessarily. He does not argue to entertain tension. He does not mirror agitation to make others feel understood. His restraint feels cold to those accustomed to emotional choreography. But calmness is not withdrawal. It is boundary. Consider social environments built on constant commentary, jokes layered over insecurity, complaints disguised as bonding, small dramas exchanged like currency. A calm man participates selectively. He listens, sometimes smiles, occasionally speaks with precision. Emotional men interpret this as distance. In truth, it is filtration. They cannot read him, and unreadable men disrupt emotional hierarchies. When someone cannot predict your reaction, manipulation loses traction. Pressure loses rhythm. Emotional escalation loses audience. The calm man does not reject emotion. He refuses automatic participation. And for those who rely on shared turbulence to feel control, nothing feels more threatening than a man who quietly refuses to become part of the storm. Lesson 3. Calm men terrify emotional men because calm is threatening inside environments built on noise. Noise creates movement. Movement creates visibility. Many men learn early that being noticed requires reaction. Speak faster, interrupt sooner, display certainty before certainty exists. Emotional expression becomes currency, traded constantly to secure position. When calm enters such a space, the economy changes without announcement. Noise depends on participation. In offices, families, friendships, even casual gatherings, tension often rises, not because problems are large, but because reactions multiply them. Someone complains, another amplifies it. A small disagreement becomes performance. Voices sharpen not to solve anything, but to remain present. Emotional men understand this rhythm instinctively. They survive through engagement. Silence, to them, looks like surrender. The calm man understands something different. Attention follows restraint more reliably than volume. He does not compete for airtime. He allows conversations to exhaust themselves. When everyone else has rushed to prove intelligence or loyalty or outrage, he speaks with fewer words. Suddenly, the room listens. Not because he demanded authority, but because restraint created contrast. In a crowded space, stillness becomes visible. Emotional men feel this shift immediately. They sense their urgency losing influence. The louder they become, the more composed he appears by comparison. What once worked now exposes excess. It feels unfair to them. They interpret calmness as manipulation because they cannot imagine strength without visible effort. Calm is threatening because it reveals how much energy others waste. Consider a crisis at work. Deadlines collapse. Messages arrive rapidly. Opinions multiply faster than solutions. Emotional men move quickly, sometimes loudly, attempting to demonstrate usefulness through motion. They answer before understanding. They argue before verifying. Each reaction signals involvement, yet confusion deepens. One man slows down. He reads before replying. He asks one question instead of 10 statements. He refuses urgency that lacks direction. Others interpret this pause as disengagement until clarity begins forming around him. Decisions stabilize near the person who did not panic. Authority moves quietly toward the one who conserved attention. History has already tested this pattern. Armies lost battles through haste more often than hesitation. Reaction feels brave in the moment. Discipline looks passive until outcomes arrive. Emotional men struggle with delayed validation. They want visible acknowledgement now. Calm men accept invisibility for longer periods. They allow results to speak later. This patience unsettles those who depend on immediate recognition. If applause does not guide action, what does? Internal judgment. That is difficult to confront. In social conflict, noise attempts to force alignment. Someone raises their voice expecting emotional gravity to pull others closer. A calm response disrupts momentum. Lower tone, slower speech. No rush to accuse or defend. Suddenly, escalation feels disproportionate. Emotional men interpret this as quiet dominance because their tools stop working. They cannot provoke momentum where none exists. And beneath irritation lies another fear. Noise hides uncertainty. Constant talking prevents reflection. Calmness introduces space where thoughts become audible again. Emotional men often avoid that space. Not because they lack intelligence, but because silence removes distraction. When calm remains steady in a noisy world, it does more than refuse chaos. It exposes how fragile chaos always was. Lesson 4. Calm men terrify emotional men because calm is threatening to those who depend on explanation to maintain control. Emotional men speak to secure position. They clarify motives before being questioned. They defend intentions before accusations arrive. Words become armor, worn constantly, not because danger is certain, but because uncertainty feels unbearable. When a calm man refuses unnecessary explanation, something fundamental shifts. Explanation invites negotiation. If every action must be justified, every decision becomes open for debate. Emotional men unconsciously rely on this opening. They probe, question, reinterpret tone, searching for emotional entry points. The conversation expands sideways instead of forward. Control belongs to whoever sustains the emotional current longest. The calm man closes that current quietly. He answers what matters and leaves the rest untouched, not out of arrogance, but discipline. He understands that excessive explanation often signals doubt. When a man rushes to convince others of his reasoning, he reveals dependence on agreement. Emotional men recognize this vulnerability because they share it. Approval steadies them. Calmness removes the invitation. Consider a simple workplace moment. A decision is made. Someone objects loudly, not entirely because the decision is wrong, but because disagreement offers relevance. Emotional pressure begins. Questions framed as accusations, tone disguised as concern. Many men respond by explaining every detail, hoping clarity will restore peace. Instead, new objections appear. Explanation feeds appetite. A calm man listens, responds once, and stops. Silence follows. Emotional men feel compelled to continue speaking because the expected emotional exchange never began. They circle arguments, searching for engagement. Without resistance or defensiveness, momentum fades. Authority remains where emotional energy failed to attach. Time has proven this pattern repeatedly. The person who speaks least often owns the final word, not because he demanded it, but because others exhausted themselves first. This restraint unsettles emotional men deeply. They interpret brevity as dismissal. If you are not explaining yourself, are you hiding something? If you are not defending yourself, do you believe you are above criticism? Suspicion grows because they measure sincerity through emotional transparency. Calm men measure sincerity through consistency. Consistency does not require commentary. In personal relationships, the tension becomes sharper. Emotional confrontation often seeks reassurance more than resolution. Questions arrive layered with feeling. Why didn't you react? Why didn't you say anything? Why don't you seem affected? The calm man answers honestly, but refuses theatrical emotion. To the reactive partner or friend, this feels like distance. Yet calmness is not absence of care. It is refusal to perform care through chaos. There is also fear beneath the irritation. Emotional men rely on emotional reading to anticipate outcomes. Raised voices signal danger. Visible frustration signals limits. When calm replaces those signals, prediction fails. They cannot tell when anger exists or whether it exists at all. Unreadable boundaries create anxiety, because manipulation depends on visibility. If guilt cannot provoke apology, if accusation cannot provoke defense, emotional leverage disappears. The calm man may never mention dominance, yet control settles naturally around restraint, and nothing unsettles reactive behavior more than realizing the conversation has already ended while words are still being spoken. Lesson 5. Calm men terrify emotional men because calm is threatening during conflict, where escalation is expected and restraint feels unnatural. Emotional men believe intensity proves seriousness. Raised voices signal commitment. Fast responses signal strength. In their experience, whoever pushes harder controls the direction of the moment. When calm refuses acceleration, the entire structure of conflict begins to collapse. Conflict feeds on rhythm. One accusation invites another. One interruption justifies the next. Tone climbs step by step until both sides forget the original issue. Emotional men often enter disagreement already prepared for this climb. They gather arguments like weapons, ready to respond before listening fully. Reaction becomes anticipation. The fight begins before the words arrive. The calm man delays reaction, not because he lacks emotion, but because he distrusts immediacy. He allows words to finish. He notices tone without adopting it. Emotional men interpret this pause as weakness at first. They press harder. Louder questions, sharper remarks. The expectation is simple. Pressure must produce movement. When none appears, confusion replaces momentum. Consider an argument between colleagues. One man becomes visibly frustrated. His voice tightens. He lists grievances accumulated over weeks. Across from him sits someone composed, listening without interruption. The emotional man accelerates, mistaking patience for avoidance. Yet something unexpected happens. Without resistance, his own intensity begins to sound excessive to himself. Calm forces self-awareness. History has already tested this dynamic in negotiations and leadership. The person who reacts fastest often reveals position prematurely. Emotion exposes urgency. Urgency exposes leverage. Calm men understand that the first visible reaction often becomes the point others attack. Restraint protects information. Emotional men struggle with this because reaction relieves pressure internally. Speaking fast reduces discomfort. Interrupting restores control. They do not always seek dominance. Sometimes they simply seek relief. The calm man refuses to participate in that relief cycle. His steadiness keeps tension present long enough for clarity to appear. Silence stretches longer than comfort allows. Rhetorical questions emerge in the emotional mind. Why isn't he angry? Why isn't he defending himself? Does he not care? Or worse, has he already decided something I cannot change? Uncertainty replaces confidence. The emotional man begins adjusting tone, searching for response. Sometimes, aggression softens unexpectedly. Sometimes, frustration dissolves into explanation. Calm did not win the argument. It changed the terrain. In personal conflict, this difference becomes even sharper. Many disputes escalate because both sides attempt emotional symmetry. Hurt meets hurt. Sarcasm meets sarcasm. Each reaction validates the next. A calm response interrupts the mirror. Lower tone, slower breathing, fewer words. Emotional men often perceive this as emotional superiority, even when no such claim exists, because calm exposes imbalance. If one person refuses escalation, the other confronts the raw shape of his own reaction. Without shared anger, anger loses disguise. Without shared panic, panic feels louder. Emotional men may accuse calm men of being cold or detached. These accusations are attempts to restore familiar terrain where reaction can resume. But calmness is not retreat. It is refusal to abandon proportion. The calm man understands something conflict rarely teaches openly. Most arguments are battles for emotional influence, disguised as debates about facts. When escalation fails to move him, emotional men sense a deeper threat, not aggression, not dominance through force. The realization that control never belonged to volume in the first place. Lesson 6. Calm men terrify emotional men, because calm is threatening to those who depend on predictability to feel safe. Emotional behavior follows patterns. Anger invites defense. Praise invites warmth. Pressure invites urgency. Emotional men learn these rhythms early and rely on them to navigate social environments. If reactions can be predicted, outcomes can be guided. When a man becomes difficult to read, control slips quietly out of reach. Predictability comforts the reactive mind. In most conversations, people scan constantly for emotional signals. A raised eyebrow suggests doubt. A faster reply signals irritation. A long explanation reveals insecurity. Emotional men interpret these cues instinctively. They adjust tone, strategy, even personality, depending on what they observe. It is not always manipulation. Often, it is survival learned through experience. Calm men disrupt this reading process. Their reactions arrive later, sometimes not at all. Approval does not appear quickly. Disapproval rarely becomes theatrical. Emotional men feel suspended inside uncertainty. They search harder for clues. Did the comment offend him? Did the criticism matter? Is agreement coming or rejection already decided? Silence provides no answer. Time has proven that unpredictability does not belong to the composed man's behavior, but to the observer's expectations. Calm men are often consistent internally. They simply refuse to display every internal movement externally. Emotional men mistake restraint for mystery because they equate transparency with honesty. Yet constant exposure is not clarity, it is noise. Imagine a negotiation where one side attempts emotional leverage. Compliments appear suddenly. Pressure follows moments later. Sympathy becomes accusation when agreement does not arrive fast enough. These shifts rely on visible reaction. If guilt appears, the tactic deepens. If anger appears, confrontation escalates. The calm man interrupts the cycle by remaining steady. Without emotional feedback, strategies fail to adapt. Emotional men begin guessing. Guessing creates anxiety. Anxiety produces more emotion. They may talk longer than intended, reveal frustrations prematurely, or concede simply to provoke movement. Calmness becomes threatening because it removes emotional footholds. He cannot be steered easily. This extends beyond negotiation into friendship and social hierarchy. Groups often stabilize around predictable personalities. The loud one entertains, the agreeable one smooths tension. The reactive one energizes conflict. Everyone understands the script. When a calm man refuses a fixed role, discomfort spreads subtly. Others cannot anticipate whether he will support a joke, ignore it, or quietly end it. Unreadable men resist categorization. Emotional men often interpret this resistance as calculation. Surely silence hides strategy. Surely restraint conceals judgment. They project complexity because unpredictability feels intentional. In truth, calmness often comes from reduced dependence on external validation. The calm man does not need to respond immediately to prove presence. Presence does not require performance. There is another fear beneath this discomfort. Emotional men rely on escalation to measure limits. Anger reveals boundaries. Excitement reveals attachment. Without these visible markers, they feel uncertain about distance. How far can they push? When will consequences arrive? Calm answers differently. Boundaries appear not through emotional explosion, but through consistent action. A conversation ends quietly. Access changes without announcement. Cooperation stops without drama. Emotional men find this deeply unsettling. Reaction allows negotiation. Silence allows none. Because the most unpredictable moment for a reactive man is discovering that decisions were already made long before emotion arrived to argue against them. Lesson 7. Calm. Men terrify emotional men because calm is threatening when it carries influence without visible aggression. Many men believe dominance must announce itself. Strong posture, loud certainty, immediate correction. They assume authority requires pressure to be recognized. Emotional men understand power through confrontation because confrontation produces clear winners and losers. Calm authority refuses that spectacle. Aggression demands attention. Calm attracts it. In social groups, influence often moves toward whoever stabilizes tension. When conversations become chaotic, people instinctively search for orientation. Someone who reacts emotionally adds weight to confusion. Someone who remains composed begins to anchor the room without asking permission. Others slow their speech near him. Interruptions decrease. Decisions begin forming around his words. No declaration was made. Authority arrived anyway. Emotional men struggle to understand this shift. They expect dominance to compete openly. If a man is not interrupting, not raising his voice, not demanding recognition, then why are others listening? Suspicion forms quickly. Perhaps he is manipulating perception. Perhaps silence is calculated theater. Emotional minds distrust quiet influence because it bypasses familiar rules. History has already tested a simpler explanation. People follow stability when uncertainty rises. Consider leadership during pressure. A project collapses hours before completion. Messages flood in. Opinions collide. Emotional men react loudly, attempting to demonstrate urgency through visible effort. They speak quickly, correct others sharply, escalate tone, hoping intensity will restore order. One man speaks slowly. He does not match panic. He asks what actually happened instead of who caused it. He separates noise from information. Others begin answering differently around him. Emotional energy drains from the room because escalation finds no partner. Authority emerges not through dominance, but through usefulness. Calm becomes direction. Emotional men interpret this as silent competition. Their visible effort no longer defines importance. The calm man did not argue for leadership, yet attention reorganized itself around restraint. To someone who equates presence with emotional visibility, this feels threatening, because calm exposes insecurity without accusation. In friendships, the dynamic appears subtly. Someone constantly jokes louder, complains harder, or argues more passionately to maintain center stage. When a calm man participates selectively, laughter and conversation still gravitate toward him, not because he entertains more, but because he consumes less space. Others feel heard near restraint. Emotional men often mistake this for charisma. It is closer to discipline. Calm authority does not rush to dominate disagreement either. When challenged publicly, emotional men expect reaction. They prepare for confrontation because confrontation confirms status. The calm man answers briefly or sometimes declines engagement entirely. Without visible battle, hierarchy becomes unclear. Emotional challengers feel ignored rather than defeated. Ignoring escalation feels unbearable to someone who relies on emotional victory. There is also fear beneath the irritation. Emotional dominance requires energy to maintain. Constant reaction exhausts attention. When others begin valuing steadiness instead of intensity, emotional men sense the cost of their own habits. They feel displaced without understanding why. Calm does not humiliate them. It reveals an alternative. An influence that arrives without aggression creates the deepest discomfort because it cannot be fought directly. There is no volume to overpower, no anger to accuse, only presence that quietly reshapes the space until resistance begins to look like noise itself. Lesson 8. Calm men terrify emotional men because calm is threatening when it establishes boundaries without hostility. Emotional men often recognize limits only when emotion announces them. Raised voices signal enough. Visible frustration signals distance. Anger becomes the language through which many men communicate refusal. Without that language, boundaries become difficult for them to detect. They wait for confrontation as proof. When a calm man refuses something quietly, confusion appears first. He does not argue extensively. He does not explain himself repeatedly. Sometimes he simply says no. Sometimes he changes behavior instead of negotiating verbally. Emotional men feel unsettled because rejection arrived without emotional permission to contest it. Emotion invites negotiation. Calm closes the door. Consider a familiar workplace moment. Someone repeatedly asks for favors disguised as collaboration. Emotional men often respond through irritation only after exhaustion builds. Complaints emerge. Frictions multiply. The refusal becomes dramatic because resentment accumulated silently. The calm man refuses earlier. He declines without apology, layered in nervous laughter. He does not accuse the other person of wrongdoing. He simply protects time or attention as if it were obvious. Emotional men often interpret this as coldness. If there is no visible discomfort, they assume indifference. They are accustomed to emotional signals that soften refusal. Calm removes emotional cushioning. Time has proven that resentment grows where boundaries depend on emotional explosions. Calm men avoid this accumulation by separating emotion from decision. The refusal does not require anger because anger is not the source of the limit. The limit already existed. This distinction feels threatening. Emotional men rely on emotional escalation to reopen conversations. If someone becomes angry, apology may restore access. If frustration appears, reassurance may renegotiate terms. Calmness offers fewer openings. Without emotional distress, there is nothing to soothe and nothing to persuade away. The boundary stands alone. In personal relationships, the tension deepens. A friend pushes repeatedly for agreement. A partner insists on emotional engagement during exhaustion. Emotional men expect visible struggle before refusal. When calmness answers with steady tone and unchanged posture, rejection feels absolute. Why are you not upset? Why are you not arguing? Do you even care? These questions reveal discomfort more than accusation. Because emotional men often measure importance through visible emotion, if refusal arrives calmly, they fear invisibility. Was the relationship never strong enough to provoke feeling? Was the decision made long ago without discussion? Calmness feels final because it lacks drama. Silence carries weight. There is also fear beneath resistance. Emotional men understand how to respond to anger. They can apologize, defend, or counterattack. Calm boundaries remove familiar strategies. They cannot provoke argument to regain influence. They cannot rely on emotional sympathy to soften consequences. Manipulation requires movement. Imagine a social gathering where someone repeatedly crosses subtle lines through jokes or pressure. Emotional men tolerate longer than they should, then react sharply when patience ends. The calm man interrupts earlier. A quiet correction, a change of subject, sometimes physical distance without explanation. Others notice the shift without spectacle. Respect reorganizes itself around clarity. Calmness does not punish. It withdraws participation. Emotional men often feel this withdrawal more strongly than confrontation itself. Anger promises reconciliation after the storm. Calm distance offers no such assurance. And nothing unsettles reactive behavior more than realizing access ended without a fight, without accusation, without emotional collapse, simply because restraint decided enough had already been said. Lesson 9. Calm men terrify emotional men because calm is threatening in a culture that confuses exposure with honesty. Modern life rewards expression. Opinions must be immediate. Feelings must be visible. Reactions must be shared before they are understood. Emotional men adapt quickly to this environment. They speak often because silence risks invisibility. They reveal constantly because restraint appears suspicious. Visibility becomes proof of sincerity. When a calm man enters this landscape, friction appears instantly. He does not narrate every frustration. He does not react publicly to every offense. Questions directed at him sometimes receive brief answers, sometimes none at all. Emotional men interpret this as secrecy. If you are not sharing openly, what are you hiding? They assume emotion equals truth. Time has already tested another possibility. Some of the most destructive decisions in history were made loudly and publicly, driven by urgency rather than reflection. Calm men understand that exposure does not guarantee clarity. Speaking less allows thought to mature before it becomes commitment. Delay protects judgment. In conversation, emotional men often seek emotional confirmation as evidence of trust. They reveal personal struggles quickly, expecting reciprocity. When calm restraint answers with listening rather than confession, discomfort grows. The exchange feels uneven. Emotional vulnerability without mirrored exposure feels risky. But calmness does not reject connection. it chooses timing. Imagine a group discussion drifting toward complaint or outrage. Stories stack on top of each other, each reaction intensifying the last. Emotional men bond through shared agitation. Agreement becomes emotional currency. A calm man listens longer than expected. When he finally speaks, he does not amplify the emotion. He narrows the issue. Suddenly, the atmosphere changes. Emotional momentum depends on expansion. Calm responses compress conversation toward reality. Emotional men feel interrupted even when no interruption occurred. Their emotional alignment loses energy because clarity replaced participation. Calm reveals exaggeration without accusation. There is another discomfort beneath this reaction. Emotional men often depend on constant expression to understand themselves. Speaking becomes thinking out loud. Without immediate response, uncertainty feels unbearable. The calm man appears self-contained. Decisions seem formed before discussion begins. This independence feels threatening because influence requires access to inner movement. If emotions remain private until chosen moments, persuasion becomes harder. Emotional pressure loses entry points. The calm man cannot easily be rushed into agreement by urgency or sympathy alone. He cannot be hurried emotionally. Social media amplifies this tension further. Immediate reactions dominate visibility. Anger spreads faster than patience. Emotional men learn to respond quickly to remain relevant. Calm restraint appears outdated or detached. Yet when consequences arrive later, those who waited often stand unaffected. History remembers restraint differently than applause. Calm men accept misunderstanding longer than emotional men tolerate silence. They allow assumptions to exist without correction if correction serves no purpose. Emotional men struggle here deeply. They want clarity now. Reputation must be defended immediately. Silence feels dangerous, but calm understands something quieter. Not every misunderstanding deserves energy. And when a man refuses to expose himself simply to ease the anxiety of others, emotional men confront a realization they resist most. Some strength does not require audience, approval, or explanation to remain intact. Lesson 10. Calm men terrify emotional men because calm is threatening when it stops being politeness and becomes quiet authority. Many men begin calm as courtesy. They lower their tone to avoid conflict. They listen to maintain harmony. Emotional men rarely feel threatened by this version. Politeness still negotiates. It still bends when pressure increases. It still explains itself when challenged. Authority begins when calm refuses to bend. There is a moment when restraint changes purpose. The calm man no longer stays composed merely to keep peace. He remains composed because peace inside him no longer depends on agreement outside. Emotional men sense this transition before it is spoken. Something familiar disappears. The calmness no longer asks permission to exist. Politeness seeks acceptance. Authority accepts consequence. Consider a workplace scenario where boundaries have been crossed repeatedly through subtle disrespect. At first, the calm man tolerated more than necessary. He answered patiently. He redirected conversations gently. Emotional men interpreted this as flexibility. They pushed further, assuming eventual frustration would appear like everyone else's. Instead, behavior changes quietly. Access shortens. Conversations become brief. Invitations decline without apology. Tone remains respectful but final. Emotional men often react strongly here because they expected emotional confrontation first. Anger could have been negotiated. Hurt feelings could have been softened. Calm distance offers neither. The decision already happened. Time has proven that authority rarely arrives through emotional explosion. Explosions reveal limits reached too late. Quiet authority appears when limits are recognized early and enforced consistently. Emotional men interpret this consistency as severity because it removes emotional bargaining. No anger means no reopening. In personal relationships, this shift feels even sharper. A friend accustomed to emotional reassurance notices fewer explanations. A partner, expecting dramatic argument, encounters stillness instead. Questions multiply. Why are you so calm? Why don't you react anymore? Emotional men fear this calm because it signals independence. Dependence invites negotiation. Independence ends it. There is often accusation during this stage. Calmness is labeled coldness. Distance is called pride. Emotional men attempt to provoke reaction, not always maliciously, but because reaction restores familiarity. If anger appears, connection still exists within shared emotion. Calm authority refuses performance. Imagine public disagreement. Someone attempts to embarrass or provoke through sarcasm or criticism. Emotional men anticipate defense. They prepare to watch conflict unfold. The calm man answers once, without urgency, or sometimes declines engagement entirely. The room senses closure, even if the challenger continues speaking. Respect moves silently. Authority here does not come from winning an argument. It comes from refusing unnecessary battles. Emotional men feel unsettled because escalation no longer guarantees attention. Their tools depend on reaction. Without it, they confront their own noise, echoing back toward them. Silence redraws hierarchy. The calm man does not announce dominance. He does not claim wisdom. Often, he leaves conversations earlier than expected, not out of offense, but completion. Emotional men struggle most with this moment. If conflict cannot hold him, if approval cannot anchor him, then influence cannot easily reach him. And nothing feels more threatening to reactive behavior than realizing calmness was never avoidance at all, but the quiet decision to live beyond emotional permission. If this message met you at the right moment, don't ignore it. Most men search for louder answers and never question the noise guiding them. Here, we choose something harder: clarity, discipline, restraint. Subscribe to Austere Mind and return when the world becomes too loud to think.